So the deck I'm playing in today's videos is, as you can see, blue-black control. It's a deck I have quite a lot of fun playing. It's also the kind of deck that I like to think I'm fairly solid at playing. You can be the judge of that yourself when you watch the videos. Obviously, take into account that it's difficult to play control well when you're videoing. But anyway, so it's a fairly standard list. I started with the list that won a GP a couple of months ago, and basically went from there, added a few cards from the new set, and kind of saw what I could do. It's a slightly experimental list, so as you'll see, I'm playing some slightly experimental cards like Font of Fortunes, but I'll kind of go through this stuff. So that the deck, if you've never seen it before, I'll start from the basics, is split into some sort of kind of separate categories. You've got your removal spells, you've got your card draw spells, you've got your permission spells, and then the ones that win, of which there are not actually that many, as you can see. And 28 lands is fairly stock. The older versions ran 3 Radiant Fountains, but I've cut Pearl Lake Ancient entirely from... I've cut a Pearl Lake Ancient from the main deck, and none in the board, so... sorry, that should be there. That's in the wrong place. And then... So it's kind of less effective. The Radiant Fountain, you can't really get that many tricksy combos as you used to be able to, which means often you just want the coloured mana. Fetch lands are quite premium when you're running 4 Dig Through Time as well, because I used to find that I'd end up stranded with 2 or 3 Dig Through Time in my hand and not much to do with them, so that's the reason I cut down a Radiant Fountain, but other than that it's fairly standard. There's an Evolving Wilds, which, it's kind of a card I'm not too sure about, but as I was saying, it's experimental list. That also was in the original list I took, and haven't found a solid reason to cut it yet. It does power Dig Through Time, and often you do just want to choose a land, but that's one that I'm kind of open to change, but then the others just... 4 of all the blue-black duels, a couple of, 4 including the fetches, 3 other 1-colour fetches, and a slew of basic lands. And yeah, that's your job, land-wise. So in terms of the rest of the deck, so a lot of them were fairly removal heavy, that as far as I've seen. So 4 Barbalight, 4 Downfall is the standard. What they used to also run was then 4 Perilous Vault and 2 Silence of Believers. So I've actually cut down effectively 3 removal spells from what they used to run. I'm only running 3 Crux of Fate at the moment. I think that's for a few reasons. I think partly because the format's turning slightly more towards control. You don't get so much of the kind of generic creature based Abzan decks that you used to get, where you can quite solidly guarantee a 2-form with Crux of Fate. When people are running Coursers and Caryatids, chances are they're not going to play around Crux of Fate that much, just because they want to get at least 2 creatures down because one of them's a land. So that was pretty much always a blowout. I think more people are tending towards the more grindy control decks, and also the kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, the really fast decks where Crux of Fate isn't actually that good. So Abzan aggro, obviously it's good against that, but they can just lay a creature down and just beat you down with it until you're forced to do something. They often don't run more than 1 or 2 creatures out anyway, so even though it seems like it would be good against them, it's not great. They can just play the waiting game and just draw loads of cards with Abzan charms and stuff like that. Another reason I have cut a real spell is that I found the deck is not very proactive, which means you do get games where you draw loads of cards, you kill all their stuff, and then you just draw 4 lands in a row while they draw a creature and kill you. You normally stabilise around 7-8 life, and yeah, you just get to the point where you draw 3 Barbalights in a row, they've got, I don't know, a Planeswalker, and you just can't deal with it. So I've tried to kind of cut down on the cards that don't do anything and added cards that do. I mean, one good thing about Ugin is that it's not strictly better, it's an almost always strictly better version of Perilous Vault, but it also actually kills people, so that's a pretty big bonus. You don't really want to run more than 2 because it costs 8, but I think that's a really big benefit to Ugin versus the old Perilous Vaults, where you can, once it's dropped onto the board and cleared the board, it then actually does something. Tasiga, equally, I want to try this card, and actually, if you watch the games, I'm recording this after the game just so I could have more to say about the deck, but if you watch the games, Tasiga was pretty busted every time it hit the board, and even though we were playing Control Mirror, I do want to try more of these. I think maybe up to 2 in the main deck, cutting either Silumgar or Pearl Lake Ancient. The reason I've got both of these, other than just trying out the deck, is that I think you want at least... Pearl Lake Ancient is probably the first creature I would cut, but you kind of want at least 1, because otherwise you can't win the blue-black control mirror. The thing with the mirror is that game 1, you just basically deck each other. You both have enough removal and card draw to neutralise all their threats, except Pearl Agent can't be neutralised, they can't counter it, and they can't kill it. So if either player draws that, the game's going to be over pretty quickly, which means if they've got these and you don't, as long as they draw it before they get to about card 50 of the deck, you're basically just dead. So yeah, that is a reason I think it needs at least one Pearl in the main deck, although I'm open to change there. I think at the moment I'd probably cut a Silumgar for a Tasiga, even though Silumgar is pretty good in every other matchup. It's got the obvious combo with Crux of Fate where you choose non-dragon and keep your creatures, which is pretty rare for a Wrath of God effect. Other than that, the counterspell suite, 4 Dissolve is pretty standard, 2 Thoughtseize, again pretty standard. I've gone with Negates, which is slightly less standard. So a couple of people have been running a few Negates in the main deck, and a couple of people have been trying out Disdainful Stroke as well. The thing I don't like about Disdainful Stroke is that often the cards you care most about are the cheap ones, so it's the Abzan Charms, the Thoughtseizes, or in the mirror particularly the Dissolves, the Negates, that kind of stuff. You're not that bothered about the expensive spells because you can either Hero's Downfall it if it's a creature or a Planeswalker, or Crux of Fate obviously, or it's a card draw spell, which isn't actually that important in the mirror because you're both drawing a bunch of cards, so it doesn't really matter if they're drawing cards. So more often than not, I've found that even though Disdainful Stroke does sometimes just get them, it hits a Siege Rhino and it feels really good. But I mean, I think most of the time Negate is just better. You'll notice I've got no Disdainful Strokes whatsoever in the entire 75. And I'm actually quite enjoying the change so far. I haven't really missed them. So yeah, there's the reasoning to that. If we look over to the card draw, again, 4D through time is fairly standard. 2 Jason Junichi is fairly standard. I would consider going to 3. The original deck that I got this from played Interpret the Signs, which, if you listen to the podcast, you'll know that Matt is not the biggest fan of that, and I cut it fairly quickly from the list. You often just don't hit, and even when you do hit, I mean, drawing 8 cards is fine, but you spent an entire turn to do it, and this isn't the deck that wants to tap out and not affect the board. It wants to tap out and -5 Ugin and clear the board. So that came out fairly quickly. I card I'm trying out, I only played it once during the games against Matt. I might have played it twice actually. But either way, I haven't had that much experience with it, but I think it actually might be pretty good. If you're not playing against a creature deck, then chances are turn 2 you're not doing much, because obviously Bile is a standard play if they just play a 2-drop. But otherwise, you kind of just want to do something. And the reason I'm playing this is that I felt that in a lot of games, I mentioned earlier, but I felt like I'd often get stranded with Dig Through Time in my hand, or just Ingenuity in my hand. There's just only 4 lands, or just not quite enough things to do. So I kind of want to try out Font of Fortunes or Divination or some kind of effect along those lines where it just gives you a play in the first few turns, it helps you dig deeper into what you're doing, and also it puts cards in the graveyard which are good with both Dig and Tasiga. So yeah, I think I might even go up to 2 of these just to give me more stuff to do, be a bit more proactive in the early game, just so I don't get games where I get rolled over by turn 5 and don't really do anything other than sit down, shake my opponent's hand and walk off. So yeah, I'm tempted to try more of those. But other than that, I'm fairly happy with the sideboard. If I was going to make any changes right now, I think I would probably cut a Silumgar for a Tasiga, and I'd add a Font of Fortunes, but I'm not entirely sure what I'd cut, possibly a Negate, just to make it that little bit more proactive. But other than that, I'm fairly happy with this initial shell. So if you want to give it a go, then possibly make those changes. Moving on to the sideboard, still no Perilous Vault. I just don't really like that card. I think it's just too slow to impact anything. But I think in the creature matchups, if they're very fast, then you want to just bring in this stuff, the Tyrannosaurus, the draw by Merc Lurkers. Not 4 of these because I think drawing 2 or 3 is quite horrible. You only really want 1. And then against the more controlling decks, obviously you just don't want Perilous Vault, and against the mid-range decks I think you have a pretty good matchup. When you've got 2 Silumgar and the 4 removal suite and a Thoughtseizes, I think there's not a lot they can do to affect you. I mean, obviously you can always just lose, but I think if you're playing against a kind of grindy green deck, you're fairly favoured if you just bring in the Thoughtseizes, the Negates, the Silumgar, and possibly Ashiok depending on how fast they are. You wouldn't bring this in against say, I don't know, Abzan aggro, but you would bring it in against Abzan whip. There is an argument that can be made to just going completely Hero's Downfall proof and not bring these in, but then it's quite difficult to do that just because you would still have the Ugins and a Tasiga. So yeah, it's up to you whether or not you board in the Ashioks, but the things you definitely want to board in are these four. Other than that, I think the sideboarding's fairly self-explanatory. I kind of discussed that a bit during the games if you want to see those. But yeah, my choices were, as with the rest of the deck, slightly because I wanted to try stuff out just because the set's fairly new, and slightly because it's just how the old deck was. The one card that I would probably cut of all of these is Ashiok. As I just mentioned, I like the idea of just being completely removal proof, so people will keep in their Hero's Downfall against you because it does kill your Planeswalkers and it does kill Tasiga. But one thing I'm considering is actually just playing Grind Clocks instead. So bring out just any creature that it targets, well, all of these basically. So you bring out 1, 2, 3, 4, and replace them with Silumgar and maybe 3 Grind Clocks. I mean, the first person who I saw playing this was, I think it was Levi Hines at the PTQ I went to in Sheffield. And maybe it wasn't him, maybe it was Bruno. It was someone else playing blue-black. I think it was possibly Bruno or Levi or both. I think they came in the same cast, so it's quite likely both. So yeah, I'm not sure if they had the reasoning of being Hero's Downfall proof, but that would be my reason to go for that, I think, just so that you just immediately nerf 4 cards in the deck that they literally do not have targets. So even though Pearl Lake Ancient is really important in the mirror, it's less important when you have a way of actually finishing them off, which is your own Grind Clocks. So yeah, I think if you were going to build this deck, possibly try that sideboard plan, or just go everything out and 3 Grind Clocks in. So yeah, maybe try that plan out of bringing in Grind Clocks and these cards and take out 1, 2, 3, 4, and then some removal spells. You might need to tweak the sideboard a bit more just to have more things to bring in, because you obviously want to take out Crux of Fate as well, but you don't really want to put in any of these. So you might have to put in a card that's okay against both control and aggro. So for example, maybe Silence of Believers, or possibly even Perilous Vault. But yeah, I'd suggest that. Try out 3 Grind Clocks and let me know how it goes. So thanks for watching this, and I hope you enjoy the actual game videos themselves.